My name is Alara Metasweet, and for as long as I can remember, I've felt like a quiet melody in a world that often prefers grand, sweeping orchestras. I find solace in the hush of dawn, the intricate patterns of a fern unfurling, the steady rhythm of my own breath. The day of my parents' 35th wedding anniversary, however, that quiet melody within me almost faded entirely. It was a sun-dappled afternoon in late September, the air crisp with the promise of autumn, and our family home, a rambling cottage called Oakhaven nestled beside the whispering woods, was filled with the murmur of guests. My siblings, Lyra and Orion, had orchestrated a surprise, the unveiling of a magnificent, hand-stitched tapestry, a family tree they had commissioned. My parents, beaming, had, of course, approved the design. We gathered in the sunroom, its windows overlooking the golden-hued garden. A hush fell as Lyra, with a theatrical flourish, drew back a velvet curtain. There it was, an undeniably beautiful piece of artistry. The tapestry depicted a sprawling oak, its branches laden with leaves of varying greens and golds, each bearing a name embroidered in delicate silver thread. There were 97 names in total, a testament to generations, to connections, to belonging. A soft gasp rippled through the room, followed by appreciative applause. My mother dabbed at her eyes, and my father squeezed her hand, his gruff exterior softened. Lyra, ever the conductor of moments, basked in the warmth of the admiration. I smiled, a polite, practiced curve of my lips, and joined the gentle applause. My financial contribution had been significant, as it often was for these grand family gestures, but my input on the design had been politely sidestepped. "We have a vision, Alara," Lyra had said with a dismissive wave of her hand. "You just trust us, darling." So I had. Curiosity, a gentle tug, pulled me closer. My eyes scanned the intricate needlework. Lyra's name was prominent, a bold, flourishing script, encircled by embroidered forget-me-nots, her husband and 2 children nestled nearby. Orion's name, sturdy and clear, had a tiny acorn stitched beneath it, symbolizing his recent purchase of a small farmstead. I saw aunts, uncles, cousins I hadn't seen in years, even Clover, our beloved spaniel who had passed 3 summers ago, represented by a little paw print stitched onto a low-hanging branch. I searched for my own name, Alara. Not on the main boughs. Perhaps on a smaller twig, or maybe they'd used my full given name, Ilara Serafina, though I rarely went by it. My gaze traced every silver thread, every carefully stitched leaf, from the deep roots to the highest twigs. Nothing. A quiet hum started in my ears, the kind that precedes an unwelcome silence. I checked again, methodically, a researcher by nature, ensuring no data point was missed. Still, my name was absent. Every single person in that room, every relative who had sent their well wishes, their names shone in silver except mine. For a moment, the sunroom seemed to tilt. It wasn't anger that bloomed first, or even a sharp stab of sorrow. It was a peculiar, hollow ache, a feeling of being not just unseen, but unbeings, as if I were a faint pencil sketch someone had decided to erase. I felt a blush creep up my neck, the kind that signals not guilt, but a profound, almost surreal, sense of exposure. I didn't weep. I didn't raise my voice or demand an explanation. I simply turned, my movements slow and deliberate, and walked towards the small downstairs powder room. Locking the door, I leaned against it, the cool wood a small comfort against my back. I sat on the edge of the bathtub, my gaze falling on the pattern of the hand-painted tiles, tiny bluebells scattered across a creamy background. I needed a moment, not for tears, but for the truth to settle. The facts were stark. I had helped fund this beautiful, deeply personal tapestry. 97 names. Planned by my siblings. Approved by my parents. And in all those weeks, perhaps months of careful consideration, of choosing threads and patterns, no one had thought to include me. Or, the thought that twisted a little deeper, they had thought of it and had chosen not to. That was the splinter. The quiet, deliberate exclusion. An oversight might be clumsy, but this felt intentional. Time slipped by. I heard the distant chime of the grandfather clock in the hall strike the half-hour. No one had knocked. No texts had pinged on my phone, which lay silent in my clutch bag. It seemed my absence was as unnoticed as my presence was meant to be on that tapestry. I rose, splashed cool water on my face, took a few deep, calming breaths, the scent of lavender soap a small anchor. Smoothing my dress, I composed my features into a serene mask and re-entered the sunroom. The tapestry remained the focal point. Guests were taking photographs, pointing to their names with quiet pride. My mother stood near the laden dessert table, chatting animatedly. I approached her, a gentle smile fixed on my face. "It's truly a work of art, Mom," I said, my voice even. She turned, her eyes bright. "Oh, Alara, isn't it wonderful? Lyra and Orion did so well." "It is," I agreed. Though, I couldn't help but notice, something seems to be missing. A flicker of confusion crossed her face. "Missing? Like what, dear? Did they forget great Aunt Mildred's new husband?" "Someone, Mom," I clarified, my smile unwavering. "Me." Her expression barely shifted. A slight pause, a tiny intake of breath. "Oh, that," she said, her voice dropping a little as she adjusted a plate of lemon tarts. "Well, darling, we talked about it, Lyra and I. We didn't think you'd truly want to be on it. You know how you are about these sentimental family displays. You're always so private." "Legacy," my father added, joining us, his voice laced with a familiar, slightly mocking amusement he often directed my way. "We figured you'd just find it all a bit much, call it performative tradition, or some such thing you read in one of your books." I nodded slowly, the quiet hum in my ears growing louder, confirming everything. They knew. They had discussed it. They had approved my absence. And they were comfortable with it. The ache in my chest solidified into a quiet resolve. I offered no further comment, no argument. I simply turned, walked through the still bustling room, retrieved my light coat from the hook by the door, and stepped out into the crisp autumn air. No one called after me. No one followed. I slipped into my small car, started the engine, and drove away from Oak Haven, not towards my sunlit apartment overlooking Willow Creek Park, not yet. I had a few quiet things to tend to, a few thoughts to gather, and a small, leather-bound journal I hadn't opened in a long time, but whose pages now felt like the only place I could truly exist. I said nothing further that evening, but a seed of change, watered by years of quiet endurance, had finally broken ground. A week later, after I shared a small, hesitant piece of my story, a spoken-word poem I'd penned in that journal, at a local writers' circle focused on authentic voices, a recording of my reading, made by a kind attendee, found its way onto a quiet corner of the internet. My sister, Lyra, the founder of the Hearth and Harmony Collective, a brand built on inclusivity and mindful connection, was soon on the phone with her solicitor, her voice, I imagined, a stark, panicked contrast to the serene images she so carefully curated for her followers. To understand the tapestry, you must understand the threads of my life leading up to it. I was diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder in my late 20s, but the awareness of being different, of processing the world through a lens others didn't share, had been my quiet companion since childhood. I didn't have the words for it then, only the feeling, like being a single instrument playing a delicate, intricate melody in a world that often only registered the loudest brass and percussion. Oak Haven, our family home, was beautiful, with its rambling gardens and sun-dappled rooms, but it was also a stage for a particular kind of family performance. My parents, while loving in their own way, valued outward harmony and conventional success. Lyra, my older sister, was a natural performer, vibrant, charismatic, effortlessly navigating social currents. Orion, my younger brother, was grounded, practical, and conformed easily to expectations. And then there was me, Alara, The quiet observer, the one who noticed the subtle shifts in tone, the unspoken rules, the inconsistencies between words and actions. One of my earliest memories is of being 5 years old at a family gathering. My great-aunt Willow, a woman with a booming laugh and even more booming opinions, had asked me what I thought of her new, rather flamboyant hat. I, taking her at her word, had tilted my head and said, "The feathers look a bit like a startled bird, Aunt Willow, and the color doesn't quite match your dress." I wasn't being unkind, merely honest, observing details. The silence that followed was heavy. Later, my mother, her voice tight with embarrassment, told me I was thoughtless and needed to learn to say nice things, even if they weren't strictly true. Orion, a year later, told the same, and her new perm made her look like a poodle, and everyone had roared with laughter, ruffling his hair affectionately. The rules, it seemed, were different for me. Lyra, in particular, seemed to embody everything I was not. She could charm a room with a story, her emotions worn openly and gracefully. When I tried to emulate her expressiveness, perhaps sharing an observation with similar enthusiasm, I'd be met with puzzled looks or a gentle "Alara, dear, you're being a bit intense." My attempts to connect often felt like trying to tune a delicate violin in the middle of a parade. So I retreated into the world of books, into the quiet companionship of nature in the whispering woods, into precise, logical subjects like botany and astrophysics in school. These things made sense. Their rules were consistent. A primrose was always a primrose. The stars followed predictable paths. They didn't require me to decipher hidden social codes or perform a version of myself that felt like an ill-fitting costume. School was my sanctuary. Academically, I thrived. The patterns and logic of science and mathematics were a balm to my often overwhelmed senses. I pursued degrees in astrophysics and computational biology, eventually finding a quiet niche in research and part-time lecturing at the local university. My work was fulfilling, my small apartment a haven of peace and order. I earned a comfortable living, more so than my siblings, a fact that was usually unmentioned unless a large family expense arose, a new roof for Oakhaven, a milestone anniversary gift. Then, the expectation was clear. "Alara, you're doing so well, perhaps you could contribute a little more?" And I always did, hoping, perhaps, that this gesture, this contribution, would finally weave my thread into the family fabric in a way that felt genuine. The diagnosis, when it came, was both a revelation and a quiet affirmation. I'd stumbled upon an article about autistic women, their experiences of masking, of social exhaustion, of feeling perpetually out of sync. It was like reading my own biography. After extensive research and consultations, the formal diagnosis provided a framework, a language for my lifelong experiences. It wasn't a label of deficit, but a key to understanding. I shared the news with my family, hoping for understanding, perhaps even a bridge. I remember sitting in Oakhaven's familiar living room, the scent of beeswax and old books in the air. My mother refilled her teacup 3 times as I tried to explain. When I finally said the words, "I'm autistic," she offered a polite, slightly strained smile. "Oh, Alara, don't be silly, dear. You're just very sensitive and you prefer your own company. Everyone's a little bit different." My father grunted from behind his newspaper, "You're too clever to be autistic, Alara. That's for people who can't manage." Lyra, ever poised, had said, "Well, you always did like to have an explanation for things, didn't you?" Orion just looked uncomfortable and changed the subject. Their dismissal was a familiar ache. It wasn't malicious, I believed, but stemmed from a deep-seated unwillingness to see beyond their established narrative of who I was, the quiet, slightly odd, but ultimately manageable daughter and sister. Lyra, ironically, was in the process of launching Hearth and Harmony Collective, a wellness and lifestyle brand that frequently touted neurodiversity and inclusive communities in its marketing. She'd feature artists with ADHD, share articles about dyslexia, and use models who spoke openly about their sensory sensitivities. Yet, her own sister's neurodivergence was met with a gentle but firm invalidation. The tapestry, then, wasn't just about a missing name. It was the culmination of a lifetime of these subtle erasures, these quiet dismissals. It was the material proof that, despite my contributions, despite my attempts to connect on their terms, I was still, in their eyes, an outsider, someone whose presence was optional, whose very essence was inconvenient to their picture of family. And as I drove away from Oakhaven that anniversary afternoon, the sun setting in a blaze of orange and purple, I knew, with a quiet certainty that resonated deep in my bones, that I could no longer keep offering pieces of myself to people who refused to see me whole. The days following the anniversary were strangely calm on the surface. The usual flurry of family group chat messages continued, photos from the party, thank yous, plans for the upcoming holidays. I observed them from a distance, the words and emojis like images behind glass. I didn't announce my withdrawal. I simply stopped participating. The automatic monthly transfer I'd set up years ago to help with Oakhaven's considerable property taxes, a contribution never explicitly asked for after the first year, but always silently expected and absorbed, I quietly canceled. The shared fund for family occasions, which had somehow morphed over time into Ilara's supplementary gift fund, I withdrew my standing order from. When Lyra sent out a cheerful group email with a payment link for a lavish bouquet she'd pre-ordered for a cousin's engagement, citing our collective congratulations, I simply archived the message. It wasn't an act of rebellion, not in the fiery sense. It was a quiet realignment, a conservation of my own energy and resources for spaces where they might be valued, or at least, acknowledged. For nearly 2 weeks, my silence and financial reticence went unremarked upon, or so it seemed. Perhaps they assumed I was busy with my research, or simply in one of my quiet moods. Then, a message from Orion popped up in the family chat. Anyone know what's up with Ilara's portion for Aunt Carol's retirement gift? The florist said her payment didn't go through. Lyra replied swiftly, a public message for all to see. Oh, I'm sure she just forgot. Ilara can get a bit overwhelmed with these things. I'll send her a gentle reminder. No worries, I can cover it for now, but someone should probably check in on her, make sure she's all right. Red heart. Overwhelmed. Their go-to explanation for any behavior of mine that deviated from their expectations. Not excluded, not hurt, not simply choosing a different path. Just overwhelmed Ilara, needing gentle management. A few days later, a voicemail from Lyra appeared on my phone. Her voice was smooth, infused with that carefully cultivated warmth she used for her Hearth and Harmony followers. Ilara, darling, just checking in. We all missed you after you slipped away from Mum and Dad's anniversary so early. Things have felt a little distant lately. I know you've been sensitive, but please know we all love you terribly. You're such an important part of this family, truly. Anyway, hope you're well. Oh, and if you do get a moment, could you possibly sort out that little bit for Aunt Carol? No pressure at all, just whenever you can. Sending love. I listened to it twice, the dissonance between her words and the reality of the tapestry, of years of quiet invalidation, creating a hollow echo in my chest. I didn't reply. The next day, an email from Lyra's assistant arrived, a forwarded invoice with a subject line, friendly reminder, Aunt Carol's gift contribution. I deleted it without opening. Then came the call from my mother, her voice tinged with a carefully controlled tremor that I recognized as her precursor to genuine distress. Ilara, sweetheart, what on earth is going on? This isn't like you. You've always been so thoughtful, so dependable. I know the tapestry, well, it was a complicated situation, and perhaps we didn't handle it perfectly, but we were just trying to do something special for your father and me. We never meant to cause any upset. Please, darling, don't let this create a rift. Family is too important. A rift I was creating in her narrative. Not their actions, but my reaction to them. The tapestry was complicated, not a deliberate act of exclusion. They didn't understand, or perhaps they chose not to. The gentle ache I'd carried for so long was slowly being replaced by a quiet clarity. I wasn't angry anymore. I was simply no longer available to play the role they had cast for me. With this disengagement came an unexpected lightness, a burgeoning sense of peace, like a garden finally being tended after a long winter. It was during this period of quiet recalibration that an email landed in my inbox from an old university acquaintance, Dr. Eris Thorne, who now curated a small, highly respected online journal called Whispers and Echoes, dedicated to personal narratives from neurodivergent individuals. He'd stumbled upon a blog I occasionally wrote, more of a personal digital commonplace book where I mused on astrophysics, poetry, and the patterns I observed in the natural world. He mentioned he was putting together a special audio series for the journal, Authentic Cadences, and wondered if I had any reflections on navigating social landscapes or the experience of masking that I might be willing to shape into a short piece to read. My first instinct was to decline. Public sharing, even in a niche space, felt vulnerable. But then I thought of the tapestry, of the years of trying to blend in, of the quiet melody of my true self being constantly muted. Perhaps, I mused, sharing my own cadence, in my own words, wasn't about seeking validation, but about affirming my own existence on my own terms. So, I replied to Eris with a tentative yes. I spent the next week not writing in a performative sense, but rather, allowing my thoughts and feelings to distill onto the page. I didn't name names or specific events beyond the universal. I wrote about the quiet girl who studied social cues like astronomical charts, hoping to navigate the gravitational pulls of human interaction without collision. I wrote about the subtle exhaustion of translating oneself constantly, of trying to match the frequency of a room when your own natural resonance was different. I wove in metaphors of starlight and botany, of the quiet resilience of moss growing in shadowed places. And yes, I wrote about the poignant symbolism of a meticulously crafted family heirloom, beautiful and complete, yet with one vital thread inexplicably missing. I called the piece The Unstitched Leaf. I recorded it in my sunlit apartment, my voice soft but clear, the gentle hum of the city a distant backdrop. Eris loved it, finding its quietness powerful. He paired it with some gentle, ambient music and released it as part of the Authentic Cadences series on the Whispers and Echoes website. I didn't expect much. A few thoughtful listeners, perhaps. I went back to grading papers on stellar nucleosynthesis and tending my small balcony garden, a haven of herbs and wildflowers. The ripples started subtly. A few comments on the Whispers and Echoes page, heartfelt and resonant. This spoke to my soul. I felt every word. The quiet exclusions are often the deepest cuts. Then, someone shared the audio link on a larger forum for neurodivergent advocacy. From there, it seemed to take on a life of its own. People connected with the imagery, the gentle honesty, the vulnerability that didn't demand pity but invited understanding. The Unstitched Leaf began to be shared across various platforms, often with personal reflections from listeners who had experienced similar feelings of quiet invisibility. I watched this unfolding with a sense of detached surprise. My intention had been simply to give voice to my own experience, to offer a small piece of my truth to a world that often felt bewildering. I hadn't anticipated such a widespread resonance. Then, the comments started to shift slightly. Someone posted, "This reminds me of that Hearth and Harmony Collective brand. They talk a lot about inclusivity, but I wonder how deep it really goes." Another replied, "Didn't the founder of H&H just celebrate her parents' big anniversary with some huge family heirloom thing?" I saw pictures. It looked beautiful, but I remember thinking someone seemed missing from the close family acknowledgments. Another, 97 names, and the one voice that truly embodies gentle authenticity is the one not visibly celebrated by her own kin. The irony is heartbreaking. I hadn't named Lyra. I hadn't named Hearth and Harmony. I hadn't detailed the specifics of the tapestry or the anniversary. I had spoken in metaphors, in the language of the heart. But for those who knew our family or who followed Lyra's carefully curated public persona, the parallels were, apparently, unmistakable. The story of the unstitched leaf began to circulate with an unspoken question mark hovering over my sister's brand, which was built so heavily on ideals of connection, community, and radical acceptance. The first sign of the storm reaching Lyra directly was a panicked call not to me, but to our parents. My mother then called me, her voice frayed. "Alara, what have you done?" Lyra is beside herself. People are saying terrible things online, connecting that story of yours to her, to our family. Her business partners are asking questions. You need to take it down, issue a retraction, something. I told my truth, Mom, I said, my voice quiet but firm. I didn't name anyone. If people are drawing conclusions, perhaps it's because the story resonates with something they perceive as authentic. Authentic? She almost shrieked. You're ruining your sister's life over a misunderstanding about a tapestry. A misunderstanding. That was still their narrative. I ended the call gently, a profound sadness settling in me. Not for myself this time, but for their inability to see, to truly hear. A few days later, a crisp, official-looking envelope arrived by registered mail. It was from a prominent law firm in the city. Inside, a letter, a formal notice of impending legal action from Hearth and Harmony Collective and Lyra Metasweet personally, for defamation, malicious falsehoods causing reputational damage, and infliction of emotional distress. They demanded the immediate removal of the unstitched leaf from all platforms, a public apology, and a substantial monetary sum for damages to Lyra's brand. My sister, the advocate for gentle living and speaking one's truth, was attempting to legally silence mine. The irony was not lost on me. Instead of fostering panic, the letter brought a strange sense of calm. The path ahead, while daunting, was now undeniably clear. I would not retract my truth. I would not apologize for my existence. The solicitor's letter felt like a cold gust of wind, but it didn't extinguish the small flame of resolve that had been steadily growing within me. My initial reaction was a quiet sigh, a weariness at the predictability of it all. Of course, this would be Lyra's response, not introspection or dialogue, but an attempt to control the narrative through force. I sought legal counsel myself. I found Ms. Anya Sharma, a solicitor known for her calm demeanor and sharp intellect, who specialized in media law and civil liberties. Her office was a peaceful space, filled with books and plants, overlooking a quiet city square. I laid out the story for her, my voice even as I recounted the tapestry incident, the years of subtle exclusion, my diagnosis, and the sharing of the unstitched leaf. I provided her with the audio recording, a transcript, and screenshots of the anonymous comments that had apparently so alarmed Lyra. Miss Sharma listened patiently, her gaze thoughtful. You didn't name your sister or her company in your piece, Alara? No, never. You didn't state any explicit falsehoods, but rather shared your personal, subjective experience and feelings? Yes, that was my sole intention. And the tapestry incident, your exclusion, is factual? Yes. I even have the bank transfer record for my contribution towards it, and the email from Lyra where she said they had the design covered and my input wasn't needed. I also recalled the digital invitation list for the anniversary party, 97 guests, each one subsequently found on the tapestry, except for me. And then a more chilling piece of evidence I hadn't initially thought significant, an accidentally forwarded email from Lyra's assistant to another family member during the planning stages, a brief line in a long chain about logistics. Tapestry final names. Yes, confirmed Alara is off. Lyra feels it's simpler this way for the aesthetic. Simpler. Like pruning a branch that didn't fit the desired shape. Miss Sharma nodded slowly, a faint smile playing on her lips. Well, Alara, truth is a rather robust defense. And simpler for the aesthetic is a rather telling justification for familial exclusion when one's brand is built on inclusivity. Let them proceed if they wish. We will be ready. The ensuing months were a period of quiet tension. Lyra's lawyers sent more letters, more demands. We responded calmly, factually, refusing to be baited into aggression. The legal process itself felt like a slow, grinding machine, impersonal and cold. Yet, through it all, I felt a strange sense of grounding. For so long, I had tiptoed around my family's sensitivities, muting my own truth. Now, I was standing in it, quietly but firmly. There was a profound, albeit challenging, integrity in that. The case did eventually proceed to a preliminary hearing. Lyra, dressed in a muted power suit, looked pale and strained, her usual vibrant confidence visibly diminished. My parents sat behind her, their faces etched with anxiety and a kind of bewildered disapproval directed, I felt, mostly at me for allowing things to get this far. Seeing them there, in that sterile courtroom, felt surreal. Oakhaven, with its warm, familiar chaos, seemed a world away. When it was my turn to speak, guided by Ms. Sharma's gentle questioning, I simply recounted my story, much as I had in The Unstitched Leaf, but with the added context of the factual evidence. I spoke of my lifelong experience of feeling different, my autism diagnosis, and the persistent pattern of being overlooked or gently dismissed by my family. I described the anniversary, the beauty of the tapestry, and the quiet, deep pang of discovering my absence. I explained how I had contributed financially, yet was excluded from the creative process and, ultimately, from the representation of the family itself. My voice didn't tremble. I looked directly at the adjudicator, not at Lyra or my parents. Ms. Sharma then presented the evidence, the bank transfer, the email from Lyra stating my input wasn't needed, the digital guest list juxtaposed with a high-resolution photograph of the tapestry where every name could be clearly seen, including Clover, the deceased spaniel, and, crucially, the assistant's email confirming my deliberate omission for simplicity and aesthetic. The adjudicator, a thoughtful woman with kind eyes, studied the tapestry photo on the large screen for a long moment. She zoomed in on several names, then looked back at the email regarding my omission. So, the family dog, who passed away some years ago, was deemed aesthetically suitable for inclusion, but Ms. Metasweet, the claimant's sister, was not, she asked, her tone neutral but carrying an undercurrent of pointed inquiry. Lyra's counsel attempted to argue that the tapestry was a symbolic gesture, not a literal family record, and that The Unstitched Leaf had unfairly painted Lyra as intentionally cruel, causing significant harm to her meticulously built brand of compassionate enterprise. Ms. Sharma, in her closing remarks, simply said, "My client shared her authentic, subjective experience, an experience rooted in verifiable facts." The Hearth and Harmony Collective champions authenticity and inclusivity. One might argue that the only reputation damaged here is the one that was perhaps not as authentically inclusive as it claimed to be. Truth, spoken gently, is not defamation. It is simply truth. The adjudicator took several weeks to deliver her ruling. It came not with a dramatic courtroom pronouncement, but as a quietly delivered document. The case against me was dismissed. Lyra's claims were deemed unfounded. She was advised that pursuing the matter further would likely be fruitless and was ordered to cover my modest legal costs. There was no triumph in that moment, no surge of vindication. Only a profound, quiet relief and a deep, weary sadness for the chasm that had opened, or rather, had finally been acknowledged. Lyra did not look at me after the ruling was made public. My mother sent a brief, sorrowful text. "I don't understand how it came to this, Alara. I just don't." But I was beginning to understand. I was beginning to understand that sometimes the most loving act towards oneself is to walk away from situations where your truth is not only unwelcome, but actively punished. The storm had passed, leaving behind a changed landscape, clearer, perhaps, but irrevocably altered. The dismissal of the lawsuit was not an ending. but a turning point. The quiet ripples from The Unstitched Leaf and the subsequent legal proceedings continued to spread. Lyra's Hearth and Harmony Collective, once a beacon of aspirational wellness and inclusivity, began to lose its luster. Whispers turned into open discussions on social media and in lifestyle forums. Former collaborators quietly distanced themselves. A few small, ethical brands that had partnered with H&H issued statements about reevaluating their associations. It wasn't a dramatic implosion, more like a slow deflation, as the carefully constructed image of effortless, authentic compassion began to show its cracks. The damage wasn't from my story, but from the stark contrast between her public declarations and her private actions, now illuminated. Within a year, Hearth and Harmony Collective quietly ceased operations. Lyra retreated from public life, her social media accounts falling silent. The vibrant, confident woman I remembered from our childhood seemed to have faded, leaving behind a more subdued, perhaps more real, version of herself, though I only heard this through infrequent, indirect family updates. My parents, too, underwent a significant change. Oakhaven, with its sprawling gardens and high maintenance costs, became too much for them, financially and emotionally. The tapestry, I heard, was carefully packed away. They sold the beloved family home and downsized to a small, modern bungalow in a retirement community on the other side of the county, closer to Orion, who, to his credit, seemed to step up to help them navigate this new chapter. I received a forwarded email, not intended for me, detailing their new address and arrangements for a low-key housewarming. I wasn't invited, nor did I expect to be. The distance was a quiet, acknowledged space between us now. For me, the period after the lawsuit was one of profound inner excavation and gentle rebuilding. I committed to therapy with a wonderful psychologist who specialized in neurodiversity and trauma. Together, we navigated the complex terrain of unmasking, of understanding the lifelong impact of trying to fit into spaces not designed for me. It wasn't a sudden transformation, but a slow, tender unfurling, like a fern finally finding sunlight after growing in shadow. There were days of grief for the lost years, for the connections I had yearned for, but also days of exhilarating freedom as I allowed my true self to emerge, bit by bit. I learned to set boundaries not as walls, but as clear, kind demarcations of where I ended and others began. I learned that my sensitivity was not a flaw, but a capacity for deep perception, and my need for solitude was not antisocial, but essential for my well-being. I poured my renewed energy into my research, finding joy in the elegant logic of the cosmos. I also started volunteering at a local community garden, finding a quiet kinship with the earth and the diverse group of people who tended it. It was there, amidst rows of fragrant herbs and vibrant vegetables, that I met Liam. He was a botanist, quiet and observant like me, with a gentle smile and eyes that held a universe of kindness. He didn't find my directness off-putting or my occasional need for silence strange. He simply accepted me, Alara, as I was. We could spend hours together, sometimes in comfortable silence, sometimes in deep conversation about everything from quantum physics to the migratory patterns of birds. With him, I didn't feel the need to translate myself. He understood my native language. Our connection grew slowly, organically, like a well-tended seed. He loved the quiet melody of my being, as he once put it, and in his presence, I felt not just seen, but cherished. There was no grand drama, no sweeping pronouncements, just a steady, growing affection that felt as natural and essential as breathing. It has been several years now since the tapestry, since The Unstitched Leaf found its voice, since the lawsuit faded into the past. Life has a gentle rhythm now, a cadence that feels truly my own. Liam and I share a small cottage just outside Willow Creek, not unlike Oakhaven in its rambling charm, but filled with our own quiet joys, our books, his plant specimens, my telescope pointed towards the stars. Our garden is a happy tangle of wildflowers and vegetables, and our evenings are often spent on the porch, watching the fireflies dance in the twilight. We are engaged to be married next spring, a small, intimate gathering of kindred spirits beneath the ancient oak tree at the edge of Serene Lake. I haven't spoken directly with Lyra, Orion, or my parents since the legal proceedings concluded. Occasionally, a carefully neutral holiday card arrives, or a brief, factual update from Orion. I reply with polite, equally neutral sentiments. There is no animosity left in me, only a quiet understanding that our paths have diverged too significantly for true reconciliation, at least for now. Perhaps one day, understanding might bridge the distance, but I no longer yearn for it with the painful ache of before. My worth is not contingent on their approval or their presence on my life's tapestry. I learned that true belonging doesn't come from forcing yourself into a pre-woven pattern, but from spinning your own thread, vibrant and true, and finding others whose threads harmonize with yours. I learned that self-respect is a quiet sanctuary you build within yourself, brick by brick, with each act of authenticity, each honored boundary. And I learned that even the deepest hurts can, with time and tenderness, become fertile ground for growth. Sometimes, when I look up at the vast, star-dusted canvas of the night sky, I think about that family tapestry, with its 97 shimmering names. My name may not have been stitched there, but I've come to realize I am part of a much larger, more intricate cosmic weaving, a unique thread in the grand, mysterious design of existence. And that, I've found, is more than enough. My melody may still be quiet, but it is clear, it is resonant, and it is undeniably mine. And for the first time in my life, I am conducting my own orchestra, playing the music of my soul, for an audience of one, and for those who choose to listen with an open heart. The ending to this chapter is not closed, but open, like a path winding through a sunlit forest, inviting me gently forward into whatever beauty and wisdom the next season may hold.